Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really pleased to be with you, although I would have preferred that I would have been in London, so my sincere apologies. But first, let me begin by congratulating the FT and the IFC for arranging this platform and an engagement with many of our business leaders, but also other stakeholders who are clearly interested in the Partnership for Sustainable Development. In December, Paris was really quite an amazing time because what we did was bring to culmination three important conferences in the United Nations. And so the Paris Agreement that we struck really underscored that for once, after years of deliberation with scientists on both sides of the divide, that climate change very much was real. And in countries like ours, we feel that every day. That climate change agreement really demonstrated to the world that people were ready to come together in this global family of ours and to start putting actions forward to ensure that we could deal with the impacts of climate change. And it was more especially, I think, for us in the developing world, this was important because we there see environment and always have been tackled as the poor member of the family. So for once we were coming up there with the economy, with the social issues, and beginning to take sustainable development in a very real way. The impact of climate change is quite clearly global, although these days it's felt so much more locally. But we do know that much in the initial stages of us dealing with this phenomena, a lot of the root causes didn't come from developing countries, they came from developed countries, and then they grew in terms of its impact as many developing countries with large populations began to grow their economies and grow it in a way in which was not sustainable and therefore increase the emissions and the impact of climate change. So the climate change agreement says one thing to those that are causing it, but those that have to deal with the impacts on a daily basis in Africa and SIDS, this is where the partnership is needed, where a genuine partnership is needed to make us come together and make the right investments to ensure that issues around mitigation and adaptation are taken seriously. And we can see them done not in pilot projects, but at scale. And so today's meeting, that we all sit to have these discussions and share the knowledge and some of the opportunities that are there for the new economy, is important because we want to share some of the things that are happening that can be done and can be taken to scale. Putting on the agenda the social aspects of this is important. It's important because that's where we see the impact in women and children's lives. And for the environment, for climate change, for the new economy, we see these every day in the lives of people. Day before yesterday, we were dealing with a diversification of the economy challenge. And we talked about solid minerals and how we were going to exploit that in our country. And yet at the very same time, we were dealing with unsafe mining practices and therefore an incidence where we had lead poisoning and who's affected? Women and children. And having to really balance that, invest in the economy, deal with issues of climate change, but at the same time make sure we're keeping our people safe. Today, the measures that we require to put into effect emergency response to some of the natural disasters, the mitigation, the adaptation, will require lots of resources, both human and financial. And it will mean that we need more skills, more technology, more innovative financing in the way in which we will tackle some of the investments that are in very difficult circumstances. The countries that we deal in today that need the most help are pretty complex environments. And so when one talks about the enabling environment, we really have to define what that enabling environment means, who's going to take what risk. And we know that much of the financial resources that we will require are, of course, going to come from domestic governments, domestic resources in governments. But how do you leverage that? How do you help to support those domestic resources? Today, some of the discussions you're having on access to water, on health, on education, these are all competing demands on a daily basis in our cabinets. They're not trade-offs that anyone should have to make between whether you invest in growing your economy, dealing with inequality and poverty, or you're dealing with, can I pay for immunization, or are we going to talk about more jobs and waste to wealth? They're very complex issues, and I think we do need to stretch and see either if we cannot be more creative in the way we bring the financing, we need to share the burden, because at the end of the day, it will deal with many more gains that we will have in a world that now we talk about root causes. And we talk about root causes because our environment, the enabling environment that you need to come into, is full of issues around migration, our IDPs, conflict, natural disasters, it's very, very complex. It doesn't tick the boxes of time before when you make the choices for what you invest in. So I think that we have an opportunity where today we know that many of these solutions can be found in the collective efforts that we made last year. It did take a good many years to get to the results that we got last year, and I think the good thing about it was that we see there was a collective effort. We stretched out of the United Nations to agree 17 goals, out of the United Nations to Addis on a financing agreement for sustainable development, in Paris, where we really did stretch into the early hours, day after day, to get an agreement that was doable. These three agreements push the boundaries on the partnerships, on the possibilities, on science, on business, civil society's concerns, be more transparent. My government, for instance, we have a president today who says the thrust of what we want to do in our change agenda must be built upon accountability, governance. Corruption's a symptom, but what's the root cause? Addressing the growth of our economy for good jobs, decent jobs for young people, but building the infrastructure that is the backbone for all of that, that power matters and roads and rail. And that finally, when we really think about the conflict situation, his first job is to keep his citizens secure. And that's been very difficult, but it is the first job we've had, and it's the one that we see already in the Northeast, a lot of progress being made. But as that conflict is doused, another one raises its ugly head. All of these have got root causes in what we need to do in investing in sustainable development. So I think the things that we talk about today at this conference provide an opportunity to keep the momentum going on what we know. And the solutions are in the frameworks that we've provided. And I think there have been some very robust discussions within the World Bank, within the IMF, within other financial institutions where we are stretching to see what can we do with capital markets. Resources are there. How do we find ways and means of unlocking those resources? What are the keys that we need? What are the instruments that we need to put in place? More recently, as the Minister of Environment, I visited our own Nigerian Stock Exchange in Lagos. And I think one of the exciting things was, once I got over what was the Minister of Environment doing in the stock exchange, was the fact that they were making a proposal for green bonds. And we never really thought about this in Nigeria. The two things that it offers to us is a budget that is constrained by falling oil prices and really a pillaging of our economy over the last 4 to 5 years. Is that we can now leverage domestic resources. We can look at capital markets and see what sort of monies and resources we can get in for the economy, the green economy be that. But it does another thing. It helps us to provide a pipeline of projects that brings some discipline into government, brings some coordination and some coherence. So when all of you come into Nigeria looking at possibilities for business, whether you're expanding a cement company or you're bringing in industry, in the manufacturing industry, because we're looking at the full value chain of agriculture and the diversification, all of you do need some discipline. You do need some coordination and coherence around policies, regulations, so that enabling environment does come to the fore. And that makes it a positive for us. And we can better communicate to the rest of the cabinet who says, green economy, environment, pipeline of projects, yes. How are we going to make artisanal mining safer because we want to go into solid minerals? How are we actually going to address smart agriculture? What does that mean? How do we look at technologies that help us to further, to leapfrog the things that we want to do? And I think that these are things that we're all speaking to, but how do we put them together for the actions that we need? So what's Nigeria doing? I've had the privilege of having 4 years helping to shape the Sustainable Development Goals, and everyone asks me, so how is this being implemented on the ground? I've always said that there will be a year or two transition to really put in place the kind of institutions, the skill sets that we need to address this. It is more complicated because we have to break the silos, we have to partner better, we have to bring things around a table where we are not necessarily sharing resources, but leveraging each other's resources to do the work that we need to do. So I don't necessarily need to talk about an energy mix with resources in the Ministry of Environment. I can be speaking to my colleague in Power and saying to him, when you have that framework, what are you doing with the renewables? What's the transition? How will that help me when we speak to addressing the livelihoods in areas that we cannot get the power there on the grid in years to come? So for Nigeria, what we've been able to do is leverage the opportunity that the INDC provided, which was to get multi-stakeholders around the table, agreeing what different sectors would do. And once we did that, take it to Paris, we come back. Implications of the Paris Agreement, and how does this work for partnerships? Well, we've spoken to transportation, we've spoken to agriculture, we've spoken to the energy mix that we've needed, and we're looking to see what sort of pipeline of projects and programs can we put together for that with domestic resources, where are the gaps, and how can we speak to you about the sustainability of some of the investments. Now, we do have existing programs, and so I can say to you today that we have the Great Green Wall. It's been around for a long time. It's about stopping the desert coming south any more than it needs to. Why is that important? Well, it has exacerbated issues around poverty and inequality around Lake Chad because the desert has come down. Livelihoods are lost, there's nowhere to go, no opportunities, people are excluded, they are easy fodder for conflict and certainly a reason for migration. But it does even more for us. It reduces the amount of land that is necessary for our herdsmen to graze in the way they have done over centuries, for farmers to continue to have their livelihoods. Where the farms are not available, grazing reserves, grazing routes are impacted, and what do you get? Conflict. And we're facing that right now. So for us, the Great Green Wall is an opportunity not just to stop the desert with a bunch of trees, but it is to take on the knowledge that we have and the research that scientists will bring to this to say that, you know what, these can be economic trees. And so there are livelihoods out of a Great Green Wall. It's a green economic corridor, which will provide work for over 40 million people. It's in 11 states, lots of local governments. Who will benefit most? Women. This will also affect the Northeast. As we come out of the challenges that we've had with Boko Haram, we are going to need lots of work, lots of opportunities and investments in women's lives, making children's lives better after the horrific past that they've had. So we see a program, we see opportunities, we're not scrapping it, we're not reinventing it, we're saying what can we do with the new agenda? Sustainable investments in what would be a green corridor. It would look at certainly renewable energy, certainly jobs for young people, men, women, and it gives opportunities for small business, big business, scale. 40 million people is not a small number that we're dealing with. So Nigeria is making its efforts along those lines. We're also dealing with other issues that perhaps aren't on the table and directly related to climate change with industrial pollution. But we speak to this because if we can leverage the revenues from investing in industry in areas like the Niger Delta, where we have the Ogoni oil spill that we launched the other day, it means that we provide more revenues to invest in other areas that will deal with the impact of climate change. And it betters the environment. We see then an economy thriving, people looking to peace and prosperity and not to conflict and pollution. And I think that, you know, all of this that we have today in the discussions, put it in context, because the context will question whether you're going to be able to do this or not, whether you will stretch or not, because there is no easy answer to this. But the implications of it are in everyone's country, in everyone's continent. And I think that this is what we have to deal with, genuine partnerships that look for solutions that will make us pretty uncomfortable because we're going out of those comfort zones. When we first started the discussions on the Sustainable Development Goals, many told us the goals are too many. Many said to us that this is too ambitious, we haven't even done the little bits yet. But if you look at the framework for sustainable development and the Paris Agreement, it's holistic. It says that you start this step by step. The bricks and mortar are within those frameworks. It's for us to try to put them together. Many of the issues that we've had to try to tackle is that in short times of the opportunity to govern, so democracy itself is a really good thing, but it's tough when you're dealing with just 4-year tranches and you're making sure that when I speak to a business person and I want them to invest over 5, 6, 7, 8 years, how will I lay the foundations for policies that won't somersault when I leave office? And I know these are some of the challenges that we have. And so what we're trying to do is to really strengthen the institutions and to look a little bit more creatively at how we create the partnerships and the agreements that we go into and some of the risk-taking that could be done by other institutions as we transition from one administration to another. So it is a work in progress. I believe that today's meeting will help us to try to find better ways of getting the results that we need in people's lives with a balance in the environment. We've had many days that have celebrated UN Forest Day and biodiversity and biosafety. They're a reminder of the challenges that we still have that are ahead of us. The thrust today will be, I think, to see that what we have agreed last year can come to fruition in a pipeline of projects. I would like to see that how we use those technologies for creating better baselines. It does not take us so long now to get live feedback from baselines that we need, so we make better choices in the investments that we have. The data revolution is needed, and it is needed now, mapping what we are doing and what we need to do and how we're progressing. A strong monitoring and evaluation framework which helps us be more open and transparent, because if we can open up the businesses and the deals that we have, civil society won't have so much problem with business if it's open and it has people and the planet at the center of it. But at the same time, it's helpful to government to know, are those investments yielding results? We should be creating the measures that will help us in country to know if in fact we've created the jobs that we said we've done. Have we moved the needle towards increasing more infrastructure that gives power in our lives? And if we say we've increased power because what's it doing? Is it helping manufacturing? Because that's certainly part of that's certainly part of the enabling environment that we talk about. I would say so much more if I was with you, but I know that it's very difficult to watch someone on video for long. I just would like to end by saying that, there is huge momentum. There are huge challenges around. We're dealing with them every day. One of the reasons I'm back in Nigeria and not with you is because we have to make that choiceless choice of dealing with what's important in our country on a daily basis against what would have been really useful discussion and networking opportunity to help you have the confidence that you can bring investments into Nigeria. Doesn't sound very good on any of the headline news that you see, but we that are here at the front do see the opportunities. We are making those steps in a direction that is going to grow our country, and there are tough times ahead, and we have no illusion about that. But we won't get over them unless we continue to have partners who are there with us through the thick and thin of this. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There are the frameworks, there are the agreements that we've had. Do we have the courage of our convictions to really hang together? Otherwise, we just won't make it. And I think that's not a legacy that we can leave, not for the young today or those that are unborn tomorrow. So I really look forward to hearing about the outcomes of this meeting and benefiting from them. Nigeria is a huge country. It has got great potentials that are slowly being realized. Tough times, all doable, and I look forward to seeing you in Nigeria.